I have the pleasure today of introducing you to Andy Ugro from Sides in British Columbia. Andy is going to help us understand the value of creative presentation for better user experiences. So something that's really exciting for all of us to learn about. And I'd like to pass it over to Andy for this fantastic presentation.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Okay. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that this presentation is brought to you from the traditional territory of the WSÁNEĆ people. I am Andy Ugro, and I'm a graphic designer and have been designing courses at Sides for about 10 years now. Sides is a K-12 online school in Victoria, BC. At Sides, we've developed a course development system that separates presentation from instruction. Today is about the presentation aspect only. I've broken this into 3 sections. So the first, it's a visual exploration of creative processes and the thoughts that go into those processes. So to help us understand that, we need to ground it on some basic principles. No heavy lifting, I promise. The second part will be a demonstration of visual design and application. And I'll talk about design execution. Maybe you'll connect with the thinking about it. Maybe you'll connect with the visuals, however you decide to do it. But for full effect, consider switching your Zoom view to full screen. It's a visual presentation. The third part is consideration of the back end workings. If we have time to it, we'll get to that. Okay, so we're going to dive right in. We're going to start by watching a video. Hang on just a second. Let's get the sound. And I'll talk about it afterwards. Just jump right in.
A lot of things can be beautiful. Landscapes, faces, fine art, or epic architecture, stars in the sky, or simply the reflection of the sun on an empty bottle. Beauty is nothing tangible, it only exists in our heads as a pleasant feeling. If we have to define it, we perceive something as beautiful if its color, shape, form, or proportion somehow are appealing or delightful to us. Beauty is a very human experience that's been with us for millions of years. Even our first tools were trimmed to a symmetrical shape. Researchers have tried to find practical reasons why our ancestors invested the time to make their tools look nice, but couldn't really identify any. It seems that early humans shaped their tools into teardrops simply because they liked them better that way. Throughout our history, the definition of beauty has changed a lot. Ideals have shifted or turned into their opposites. But beyond individual and contemporary taste, some things have never really gone out of fashion. The golden ratio, symmetry, or fractal patterns can be found in the art and architecture of cultures from our beginnings to today. Humans seem to be in mysterious inherent agreement about the beauty of certain things. The patterns that keep coming up are all rooted in nature. They became part of our biology because they helped our ancestors survive. Fractal patterns, for example, occur all over nature, in snail shells, flower heads, waves, or clouds. Identifying and assessing these things and phenomena correctly used to be vital. Do those clouds mean rain will come soon? Are these waters safe to swim through? Can I eat this? Another pervasive thing is symmetry. In nature, it means everything is as it should be. Stems and trees and leaves and blossoms all grow symmetrically. A deer with impressive antlers is probably a source of nutritious meat. A deformed wheat ear may not be safe to eat. A symmetrical face is more likely to belong to a healthy and fertile mating partner. Because symmetry is so common in fauna and flora, it's extremely familiar to our brain. It helped our ancestors evaluate their environment more easily and react quickly to danger. Things that help us survive activate the reward center in our brain. Recognizing signals of safety and nutrition trigger nice feelings in us. So our sense of beauty probably evolved from pattern recognition. But it goes way beyond that now. Humans seem to have evolved an instinct for beauty that is deeply hardwired into us.
Okay, we're going to stop it there. So I hope you enjoyed that. I do every time. I included it because it begins to answer the fundamental questions of why. Why design? Why as a part of learning? What role could it play? That'll become clear as we move through this. And the second reason is we're going through a creative process today. So the first stage in that is empathy and understanding. So I think it begins to satisfy some of that, probably not in the way you'd expect. But mostly I included it because it spoke of beauty beautifully. That's kind of the theme today. So the video touched on this, this particular part of psychology, pattern recognition and symmetry. That's what it touched on. So looking at the graphic, you would, and reading the second point, an organized whole is perceived as other than the sum of its parts. Well, looking at the graphic, some of you will see one of two squares. You might see both. Really what you're seeing is four separate triangles, all different colors. But the mind's eye wants to construct it into a single shape to make sense of it, to give it meaning. Let's look at some of the principles. So here's two of them. Proximity. Elements arranged close to each other are perceived as more related. Makes sense. Similarity in the form of shape and other qualities are perceived as being grouped together. You know, this may seem obvious to you. It does to me. Yes, we see three different groupings. They're separated by spatial relationships and color. It's kind of a no-brainer, but that's the point. Let's look at a couple more. Symmetry, the video touched on that, you know, giving us a feeling of solidity and order. That sounds powerful. Elements arranged in a line are perceived to be more related than those arranged randomly. Again, it's a different principle, but same kind of idea, same grouping idea. But here's the crux. Without this unified order, our brain would have to cognitively process to make sense of it. And that's the reason UX, UI designers have embraced these principles to reduce cognitive load. It's a no-brainer. So moving on to visual design principles. This is where we organize these cognitive processes into compositional flows. Now this is starting to sound like something. Cohesive, meaningful, visual stream of information. That just sounds beautiful. So we use hierarchy because without it, there'd be no discernible objects. There'd be nothing to draw the eye towards. It's often used as contrast, and that's to separate elements into separate groupings. You know, we can draw attention to a particular area and hold it there, or we can draw it away to direct an action. Going in another level, we've got our elements of design. We have our line, our color, our value, size. So we use those elements to execute these principles to be visually consistent with how our brain works. Easy peasy. A couple more principles. Interaction, we're not going to get a lot into that, but like compositional flow, which organizes the visual delivery of information, interactions provide an actual physical one, or as physical as it can be in a virtual environment. But they act on each other, and I think the graphic sort of shows that. And communication, yes, we want to communicate ideas or concepts. You know, this is education. But, you know, I might add that, you know, this is presentation and we've separated that from written instruction. So our communication would rather infer what the learning is about as opposed to, you know, direct learning. So keep that in mind. Moving through our design process. Okay, so goals and objectives. We want to create better user experiences. We want them connected to the learning material, connected. It's a key point. We want to create more immersive experiences, similar to physical spaces. So thinking back to the video and how our visual sense is so well connected to our physical environment, but consider our modern world, our cities. We created our spaces. We designed and built buildings, all shapes and sizes. We designed our parks and outdoor spaces, our museums. we designed these to immerse ourselves in them. We work, live, and play in these spaces. We made them to make us feel good. When we make them better, we feel better. So how might we achieve this in a virtual environment, a learning environment? Maybe through thoughtful, disciplined, creative execution? Let's find out. So this is a typical SIDES course, and all SIDES courses follow a basic consistent pattern. It begins with the introduction and with clearly defined learning objectives. The main instruction is grouped into segmented sections, and that's accessed in order by the learner through an interaction, the buttons down at the bottom there. The learning is top to bottom, linear. So let's look at our design. It's across and down. We have horizontal segments shaped visually. The header, it draws the eye across. We use color and even some of the elements within it to do that. We have our separated sections, the learning objectives, similar shape to draw the eye across. We've basically got 3 rectangles in a horizontal, on the same horizontal plane. That's across. Looking at the left-hand side, we have a column of color. That's downward. If you notice the paintbrush, we are literally drawing the eye downwards, painting it downwards. So that's our compositional flow. And it'll be consistent through all the courses, and you may not notice it, and that's a good thing. You shouldn't. So the introduction is where we introduce our visual theme, our creative. This is where we establish our design concept. We create a personality for the communication. This is where we can make a strong impression as to what the learning experience will be like. And we need to connect the content. Social Studies 10 curriculum explores different perspectives and ideas about Canada's development into a society. So, historical context, black and white color scheme, archival, antiquated photography, one color only, maple leaf red. So combining these two elements paints how these historical events shaped Canada's contemporary society. It's a strong concept, and we need a strong concept to hang our visual execution on. We need a good design system, one we can adapt to create variety. So here's another unit, and we change the view while maintaining the unity of the course as a whole. We want to create that wholeness, but we change it slightly to reflect the different information. Notice the header up at the top where we utilize the color, and we put that in there. It's a bit of a visual subtext. We can create independent narratives. We can tell stories. Some of the messaging could be powerful. Sometimes it needs to be. So here's a typical main instruction page. Now what we want to do here is it's different information. You notice the different segments. Well, this is 2 of them. And you can see the slight separation between them. The shifts in the broad borders on the left-hand side, that's our horizontal rhythm. That's creating that separation, but you can still see the column created on the left-hand side, bridging the 2 elements together. And in fact, it goes right through sort of that visual delineator in the middle and connects them that way. So we connect through color and line. Those are the elements that we're using. Different information we can treat with a different format. We need to separate these. We're creating contrasts. This is a learning activity. So it's a drag and drop. It can have different styling. We need to make it visually perceptible as to what the learner has to do. And the symmetrical format seems to do that quite well. They have to drag the numbered squares into the vacant spaces. And it's compartmentalized. So, thinking back to our Gestalt, where we look to create these single shapes initially before we break down its individual parts. Here's a different course. So initially what you can see is it's a similar structure. We're going to maintain that through all the sides courses, but where we can adapt is in our execution to match the information that we're talking about. So looking at this one, you can see we don't have that horizontal downward motion, but we still have that same compositional flow. It's just defined by a different column. This time it's created by the left aligned text. The header, it's different communication as well. This is a more stylistic approach. We're not communicating any ideas other than what is the subject matter. It's biology in this case. There's a lot of texture, multiple intricate shapes to draw the eye to. We're drawing it to that first third of that horizontal plane. That's a good starting point for the information. But we still have that cross movement, and it's quite fluid. So the user can spend time exploring it. They might think it's cool. What if they equate that to the learning? Is science cool? So here's a typical main instruction page. You can see how we continue with the unity by continuing the theme. We're using color in this case. Look at the navigation buttons. Is it visually perceptible as to what the user can expect by clicking on them? It's actually literally apparent in this case, but we want to do that. Notice the contrast between the two types of buttons, but it is visually perceptible that you can expect a different result from each. Here's another unit. And of course, we intentionally want to change to provide that variety for as they learn and move through the course. What we're trying to get across there is make it visually perceptible that the student's progressing through the course. A feeling of progression, that's a good feeling in a learning environment. You can see the similarities between the headers. We want to continue that theme. We've introduced a new color. We've kept a couple of the ones from the previous execution. We're looking at another course here. Notice the horizontal across, notice the downward motion. Different concept with, this visual execution here, quite different actually. Even though it's the same red border, but it has a different context. The red had the context of Canada previously. This time pathways. We've got graphical elements there. You notice those little roadways. They're actually helping draw the eye into the movement that is natural for the flow of the learning material. So the imagery here connects to the learner on a more personal level. And learners have to identify, if we think about the learning material, they have to identify with their own strengths and weaknesses, map out their goals, plan for their future. This is really a good synthesis of the visual execution, and the information that it represents. Form follows function, kind of a no-brainer. We can do some interesting things with some of the imagery that we're using. These are our visual devices. We could adapt and change them, and we can create visually different themes for that, get that progression effect, but we can also make it fun. The idea is to connect the learner to the content, or connect with the learner. In this case, we want the learner to be able to see themselves in this course. They're learning about themselves. That's the connection. Here's a main instruction page. You can see it's very similar, but essentially you're looking at two different visual elements. The text in its entirety is one, and the theme that we're continuing throughout it is the other, separated quite well. I think that the readability is quite easy. Most of the visual treatment is done in the introductory section. That's where we want to start. That's where we make the impression. They get to this stage. This is where the learning happens. We want to tone it down a bit. And here's another header, and you can see what we're doing with these pathways. We can actually communicate ideas depending on how we implement those things. But we've created enough images and variety of people and a variety of activities so that maybe the learner actually will be able to see themselves within the context of that learning. And that could be a good feeling. So here we are with another course. Now, sometimes we need to change our thinking to be able to connect with the content and with the learner. A little bit different with this one. I considered the types of learners taking this Biology 12 course, and they're taking it because they're pursuing careers in medicine. They're pursuing careers in health. And they're going to have to take, and they're taking this as a requirement for post-secondary as well. So there's a lot of work involved. So thinking about the learner and trying to empathize, I want them to feel important. I think that this profession is historically connected as and recognized as important. I think it's always on the cutting edge of technology. So that's our hook. That's the concept that I want to attach the visual execution to. And I needed a good design system for this. So I found these Gray's Anatomy illustrations. They're in the public domain, they're free to use. And I think it captures that historical connection that I want to make, but also, there's a bit of nostalgia in there. I kind of like the way it feels. And then we've composited these sort of technical illustrations over top of them. Represents maybe scanner equipment, maybe data visualization. But what we've got is this really unique juxtaposition, creating that time frame to maybe capture that historical significance. And it's also technology sort of creates that separation. These kids have to spend a lot of time in this course. It's a big course. So I want them to sort of appreciate maybe the efforts that we, their learning provider, provided for them. And I'm kind of hoping they'll take these. They're very unique. I don't think they've ever seen anything like this anywhere else. I never have, and I didn't know that I would get to this point. But it's by changing our perspective and how we try to solve a design problem, that's how we can maybe realize different perspectives and come up with different solutions. I think it turned out beautiful, and I think that really was the goal here. But the information, again, this is peripheral. We look at the headers, we look at the borders. The learning is not being distracted, but the experience is full and it's consistent. Here's a typical page. You can see what we did with the navigation here. It's consistent, but they all direct to different types of information so they can have different treatments. That's another activity, but it's compartmentalized. It's different information. We can separate it visually. I'm going to skip over these ones and move to this because I'm watching my time. So this is English 12. Now, English 12 is an important course for SIDES. It's just that it's one of the only curriculums that it's an examination of First People's studies or examination of First People's text and how that could build understanding of a relationship to reconciliation. That's kind of the connection there. It's reconciliation and Indigenous First Peoples texts. So we need a good hook to hang that connection on. And I chose language loss. So the treatment for this, and it's a nice bridge, it is texts, it is visual, but the learners, I think they can connect to this because we sort of bookend it with other languages. We start with English words. We move on to a middle section that is a number of Indigenous words. And then we move on to other cultures. We include Spanish words, we include French, Hebrew, I think even. But for the indigenous words, we provide the origin of the language, the region where it's from, and even an audible pronunciation of it. And I think we're creating a unique, a unique perspective about the importance of texts and how they they carefully construct, they construct through culturally, but also politically and regionally. So it kind of connects by including the different words and the different cultures. It sort of connects all three of those ideas. So Indigenous. We can't be too strong of a theme on that, but I wanted to connect through maybe other elements, earthy colors, maybe some natural patterns and textures there. There's cedar here. We want to highlight the literary works that are used as exemplars. This is one of them. Here's a different unit look, and you can see we want to make that transition. But look at those words, those Indigenous words. Even the character sets used are interesting. I think the user will spend time with those, and I think they'll make that connection of language loss to reconciliation. So here's a typical instruction page, and you can see what we did with the borders here again. But really, those two different elements, the text is one element, and it's symmetrical. So it contains itself within itself, and it's separate from the borders. They're peripheral. Another reading again, and just how we treat that, and we continue the theme unit to unit. English 12 is a beautiful course. Another approach again, composition 11. So when the writer created this course, they broke it into 4 separate broad themes: voice, perspective, and identity. And it just opened the doors for creative possibilities, new ways to connect to the learner. I wasn't limited to the content itself, but I had these broad themes to work with. So the users can represent their learning through different modalities. They can submit their learning through oral text. They can do it through visual text. They can do it through presentation, multimedia presentation. It is a creative communication course. Can I demonstrate that and inspire that with what we create through the experience? So the execution's a contemporary look and a creative one. Notice the Banksy style illustrations. We can adapt that and change that from unit to unit to hammer in on that theme of perspective or voice. In this case, it's audible imagery. And it's got a nice contemporary feel. There's our broad border again. Nice visual, nice horizontal or nice vertical rhythm to move through that chorus. This overall, it evokes a playful, free expression. And I think that's good. We can make them feel that way because they're going to learn how to express. But it's about the feeling. Let's create an impression for their learning. You notice the header section. I want to show you what we did with that. It's kind of fun, isn't it? Just notice the theme on this one. So we changed that up. We want to be consistent with that progression through the course. Okay. I hope you enjoyed that. We want to use all the senses. Think about the broad theme of voice. Yeah, it's begging to introduce some audible elements to it. These excerpts are from the literary works that are used as exemplars. So there's a little bit of connection to the learning that way, but they're not meant to create or mean anything like a literary device. It's just an interesting hook to start the learning. It has to be behind the play button there because we can't start it automatically. So the user has the choice whether they want to play these or not. But from the feedback I'm getting, they like them. They go through them. So just got to move along real quick here. Another way to connect to the learner, usable themes, providing the learner with an option for choice. This is a physical health and education unit or a course, and we can still provide variety, but that connection the user can make to having the opportunity for choice, it creates a different emotion, doesn't it? But still a good one, a good feeling, that interplay of emotion and learning. We want positive there. Just another, there's another one of the choices. and yet another still. It kind of speaks to the kind of learner that takes PE online. And so we want to look for themes that might connect with that. Here's another variation, and this is the last one. Another variation of that, of providing user-controlled themes that they can choose to match their learning. So I'm just going to play this one. This one's a little video, but here's what I want you to think about. What kind of emotion might trigger the reward center of a young learner when they can match their converse runners to their mood for learning on any given day? We want to make learning fun. So that's the end of this section. So I want to leave you with this quote. And I love this quote. It's from a cognitive science researcher. Sounds like he's considering a career in graphic design, actually. Okay, well, I think I'm out of time. So I'm going to stop my share here and give this back to Jacqueline.
Thanks so much for that presentation, Andy. I want to take those courses. They're absolutely, that content is beautiful and those designs are incredible. So thank you. There were two little questions in the Q&A, and they're kind of on a similar theme about accessibility. We'll just take one quick minute to answer those before we end this session. Sure. So do you see those in the chat, or would you like me to read them out, Andy?
I just called it up.
In the Q&A.
Read them out. Oh,
sure, yeah.
There we go.
So,
sorry.
I'll just read them out in case anyone wants to hear them out loud. So how do accessibility standards drive your design process? And then the other one is how much of this lovely design is reflected in alt tags or other accessibility features?
Oh, good questions. So how is accessibility reflected? Well, we have to think about the mechanics of the course. So we've got solid HTML markup, HTML5 spec, all the headings, all the paragraphs, everything is tagged properly to have that semantic meaning. The styling is all done through CSS. So we can remove that styling. And really what we're doing is we can create a text-based version. It is written text, so it's written instruction. But by smart use of our HTML5 standard and our CSS handling all the design, what we can do is we can make that learning accessible to adaptability. So consider the read speaker tool within D2L. If you look at any of these courses, you'll see the plain text version. Plain text is universal. This is the common denominator. This is where the user can adapt it to an audible modality, where they can adapt the language. So text-based instruction is kind of the connection for that question. And the other one, yeah, well, I think I answered that at the same time. Yeah. The image is separated. Or the images are all separated. So they're ornamental. They don't need alt tags initially. So that's kind of how it's done.
Thanks, Andy. And thanks everybody for attending this Fusion session today. Don't forget there's more sessions on this last day of Fusion. We're going on to a break now. Feel free to network in the Fusion Lounge, take a lunch break, and we'll see you back at 1 p.m. for more great sessions. Thanks again, Andy.
Thank you, Jacqueline.